I'm going to turn now to Naomi Ishisaka to my left. Naomi is currently the communications director for the immigrant rights nonprofit One America here in Seattle, formerly known as Hate Free Zone. I'm looking forward to the time when One America is just called One America instead of One America, formerly known as Hate Free Zone. Haven't quite got there yet, but I think we're coming up on it. Naomi also has experience in both the commercial and, well, in the mainstream newspaper industry, as well as in the ethnic media, having been a former employee of the Seattle Times and more recently editor of the wonderful local magazine Colors Northwest. I'd like to turn to her with the question that you've worked both in traditional newspaper settings and in the ethnic media. While allegedly, and we can talk about this, while allegedly there are ethnic community media outlets that are experiencing growth, although I've just seen some documentation after the contrary, unfortunately. Newsroom diversity across the board in all the service industries is definitely taking a hit because of these recent waves of layoffs and the crisis and so forth. Writing by and for people of color continues to be marginalized in a lot of the major blogs and quote-unquote new media. So what are some of the challenges and, if we can, opportunities now facing audiences and journalists of color?
Yeah, in preparation for this panel, I was looking for challenges and opportunities, and I found quite a lot more challenges than opportunities. So hopefully my other panelists will fill in the opportunity gap that I seem to be seeing. But you know, there's, I think, kind of a well-trod conventional wisdom out there that ethnic media is sort of recession-proof, that the rise in the demographics of people of color in the country are going to somehow eclipse the downturn in the economy for everyone else. And I kind of thought that that was possibly true, even though my own personal experience did not bear that out, because I'd heard it repeated so many times. And in researching in advance of this panel, you know, I found that that really is not borne out by much evidence, and the same factors that you would imagine would hit the more vulnerable media organizations the most, the ones with the least amount of resources, the ones with the shallowest pockets, which would be the ethnic media, are being hit often harder than the mainstream media, which is, I'm not sure where this sort of idea came from that the ethnic media is immune to the same downturns that everyone else is, but it is not borne out. And I think being really honest about that, I think, is the first step to taking a look at one of the vulnerabilities that that's going to create for communities of color, but not only communities of color, but the media landscape as a whole. So on a general basis, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is the Black Press Association, found that the number of organizations in their membership has declined by about 200 from a peak in 2000. And that's repeated across the board in every statistic I found. So pretty much anything you look at, even online, people might be reading news online, but the organizations that were producing information, and I think this is something that BPI is probably going to experience and we're going to talk about more, they don't have the resources to do that. And I think the point that Sarah mentioned, I think, is really important in the sense that, yes, there's tons of information out there. One of the factoids that you could probably see as a positive was the number of black blogs increased from 75 in, I think, 2000 to 75 in 2007 to 1,200 in July of 2008, and that's a huge increase. And so yes, there's tons of information out there. Everyone has a blog, and everyone's writing about what they want to see the world be, and that's a wonderful thing. And I think we need to encourage that, we need to foster that, and we need to really help that thrive. I think the part that worries me, and I think the part that worries a lot of us, is the lack of professionalism and the lack of sustainability in those models. So a lot of that blogging is riffing off of content that somebody invested the money to create. And as Sarah pointed out, $900 for an investigative piece on a water system is not going to cut it. How is a person going to be able to focus the amount of time they need in order to do the kind of journalism that then becomes fodder for those blogs in a very real way without that investment of resources and without that professionalization? And there's another sort of conventional wisdom that's running through the new media crowd in this discussion that I think is really problematic, which is that citizen journalists are going to take the reins from the mainstream media and they're going to make the need for professional journalists obsolete because they're going to do all the work that professional journalists used to do, and it's going to be a wonderful thing because everyone's just going to, all this wonderful information is just going to rise to the top. And I think the challenge is, I think Sarah's example is great, which is public water systems. Who's going to spend the time of their own free time doing the slog work that professional journalists have always done? It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, it's not really that fun, but it's what's necessary in order to dig out the information that then becomes part of our civic dialogue. And I think that the people that are really excited about the citizen journalism, I think that's wonderful as a supplement to journalism that's actually been vetted and researched and somehow weighed against facts and weighed against evidence. And I think it's that, as Obama says, evidence-supported science is going to be the future of our science policy. And I think evidence-supported journalism should be our goal. And it sounds crazy to even have to say that, but given the landscape we're in, I think it's necessary to say it's got to be evidence-supported journalism that is the goal in terms of that what I consider sort of the soil that the rest of the media landscape grows out of. And I think unless we sort of nurture that soil, everything that grows out of it is going to be very, very tainted. And that goes double for the ethnic media, who've always struggled harder and always had to work harder for less to do their part in achieving that goal. So I'm very, very concerned, and hopefully Stephen's presentation will be full of optimism and hope and opportunity, because I'm very bleak, and I think that the ideas that Sarah mentioned before are pretty much the only hope in sight, which is potentially government sponsored, potentially foundation sponsored. But I think what it has to be is it has to start with a serious conversation, a tough conversation with ourselves to say what is necessary for our civil society to function. And I think we have to say, as much as energy in our electrical grid, as much as water in our pipes, as much as the air we breathe, this is necessary for our civil society, and we need to invest in the resources and the techniques and tools to make that possible for professional, sustainable journalism, and then the rest of it can grow out of that.